The next gland I'll talk about is the thyroid, and it's located more or less in the throat. It's also regulated by the pituitary, and it regulates your metabolism. You might be familiar with metabolism because people say that thin people have a fast metabolism and fat people have a slow metabolism. Basically, your metabolism is how quickly your body undergoes chemical reactions, how quickly it uses energy, and how quickly it makes protein. The thyroid also regulates calcium deposition, which is how your bones get calcium. Hyperthyroidism is a disease in which a person has an overproduction of the hormones produced by the thyroid. Since the thyroid increases your metabolism, what would be a symptom of having hyperthyroidism? Well, being skinny would be, so you'd have weight loss. But there are other less sightly problems that come from having hypothyroidism, like this goiter. A goiter is a swollen thyroid. This is a chemical compound you need to maintain normal function in the thyroid. Here you see an I. On the periodic table, an I stands for iodine. In the first world, we eat salt that is iodized, but in the rest of the world, this component of the diet may be missing, and when this component of the diet is missing, you can have a goiter even though your thyroid is producing normal amounts of hormone. The parathyroid regulates the release of calcium from your bones. What organ did we just say regulates the deposition of calcium in bones? The thyroid. If you do not have enough calcium in your bones, you have osteoporosis. You can see here what a normal bone looks like versus what a bone with osteoporosis looks like. If you drink soda like it's water, you can actually cause yourself to develop osteoporosis. And as you can see from the woman in the middle, as you get older and lose bone density in your vertebra, you can actually start to have a humpback from having too weak of bones. So be careful and don't drink too much soda. The next gland we are going to talk about are the adrenal glands. These are also regulated by the pituitary, and they're located near the kidney. We talked about them earlier when we discussed the response to stress. As I mentioned, they produce cortisol, but they're also important in your flight or fight response, in which you produce epinephrine or adrenaline, which is your short-term response to stress. It would be like the equivalent of if I just ran up behind you and yelled boo, as opposed to cortisol, which is produced over a long period of time. The adrenal glands are located in both men and women, and they produce androgens like testosterone in both sexes. But, as we all know, men have another organ that produces even more testosterone, the testicles, and women do not have those. So, although both sexes produce some testosterone, men have much more of this androgen in their body. Who is this person? This is, of course, JFK, and he suffered from Addison's disease, in which he had too low of a production of the hormones from the adrenal glands. The hormones from the adrenal glands are important in keeping your blood pressure up and your heart rate up. And so if you do not have enough of those hormones, you can actually suffer from fainting spells and stuff like that, and the disease can actually be fatal. Another side effect of the disease is that since the hormones from the adrenal glands are important in laying down melanin in your skin tissue, if you have Addison's disease, you will look like you have a perpetual tan. Estrogen is an important hormone that most of you actually are familiar with. What does estrogen do? Well, it does different things for men and women. In this cartoon, you have two men walking to work together, and one man says to the other, "Lord knows I've battled my demons, Gordy, but you might want to chill on the recreational estrogen." In women, estrogen produces a sexual secondary characteristics like breasts, and it is an important part of regulating the menstrual cycle. But in men, it's also important. It is important to the maturation of sperm and the achievement of erection. So men, if anyone ever tells you that you have too much estrogen, just take it as a compliment and say thank you. This is the cycle of the ovarian and cycle and menstruation. So what you have here are two different cycles of hormones. On the top you have the cycle of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, which are important in the release of the egg. And these hormones are both regulated by the pituitary in the brain that we talked about earlier. On the bottom you have estrogen and progesterone, which are both female sex hormones released by the ovaries. And you can see that the relationship between these two hormones are responsible for initiating and terminating the menstrual cycle. Another hormone that you guys may have heard of is insulin. If you don't produce enough insulin, you have a disease, and that is known as type 1 diabetes. You may also be familiar with type 2 diabetes, but in type 2 diabetes, the person does produce insulin, their body has just become insensitive to it as a function of a poor diet. Insulin is produced by the pancreas. Everyone's favorite part of the endocrine system is to talk about steroids. Steroids are important in building muscle by stimulating protein growth, and that is part of the normal function. Of course, if you take extra steroids, you do produce extra muscle growth, as you can see in this picture here. However, it's not all fun and games, because you'll wind up with some side effects that you don't appreciate. This deflated balloon is representing your testicles on steroids. Remember the negative feedback? Well, when you're injecting testosterone into your body, your hypothalamus senses that and shuts down production of testosterone by other parts of your body, like the adrenal glands and the testes. When this happens, then your testicles shrink and you stop making sperm. So it's probably not so much fun. Not all steroids are bad, of course, and steroids are an important part of your body's functioning, and having a regular amount of steroids in your body is important. Steroid simply describes the type of chemical compound that it is. So you're probably familiar with people who have asthma or allergies, and they may take steroids from an inhaler, and that is perfectly fine. They are needing to do that, and it will not cause them to get massively huge muscles or to start growing hair on their lips or to have any other of those problems, although in some cases people who have to take inhalers a lot do develop a little bit of aggression during that time. The corticosteroids are important in controlling inflammation. What's interesting is that human beings co-evolved for a long time with the creepy monster you see there on the screen, which is actually a very small animal called a hookworm. We are thought to evolve with them since before we were human beings. That is to say that human ancestors also had hookworms. And in fact, what hookworms do is they try to copy our endocrine system by secreting something like a hormone, except that instead of being produced by glands in our body, it's produced by the hookworm, and it tries to calm down our immune response. Because of course, if you're a parasite inside the human body, you don't want the human body's immune system to be responding strongly. But since we have co-evolved with these hookworms over so many years, some people can't regulate their immune response to be low enough, and so they have problems like asthma and allergies, which is basically your body overreacting to a non-pathogen substance. What they found is that in the third world, people do not suffer very much from asthma or allergies, and this is thought to be because in those countries, people still have hookworms. If any of you have heard of a latrine, you know that it's basically a trench filled with human feces, and it's a communal place where people go to poop in countries that don't have plumbing. So if you ever go to India or other poor parts of the world, you can visit these trenches. And one man from Santa Cruz, who did have this problem, visited the trench and walked around barefoot, and of course he was infected with hookworms. Once he was infected with hookworms, he was able to coexist more comfortably with his allergies and asthma, in that he was able to go outside even in the springtime. And he began pooping into containers, sterilizing the worms from his poop, and selling them to other people who also had this problem. Of course, he was caught and he had to flee to Europe, because that is not legal in the United States. However, in Europe, hookworms are being studied as a potential treatment for both allergies and asthma. I just wanted to share something with you guys for Science News, and I will post in the blog a follow-up video to this, which will show you guys what telomeres actually look like. If any of you are familiar with Dolly, Dolly was a famous sheep who was cloned, but died soon after being born, and it is thought in part that perhaps she died because her DNA was from an older sheep, and so her telomeres were shorter. A recent study has shown that mice that eat 40% less calories live 20% longer and have less incidence of cancer, possibly because of having to undergo mitosis slightly less and producing less possible aneuploid cells. This study was conducted by Maria Blasco of the Spanish National Cancer Research Institute. Thank you, and I hope that this has been informative.